I've seen a few of these videos on YouTube and I thought it might be interesting to share some of the art supplies I regret buying. This doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad, although some of them aren't great, but just mainly that they weren't right for me. You might be surprised by a few of the supplies featured in this video, so let's jump in. Let's start with the Fraser Price Brass Palette Box. It's actually made from electroplated brass and it's marketed as being a watercolour box that's ideal for artists working both in the studio or outdoors. It costs a staggering £100, but I actually bought mine mainly with my Jackson's affiliate credit. I'd saved it up to buy something as a treat for myself that I wouldn't normally buy. I do really like this little box, but it does come with a few issues that I wish I'd known before I bought it. So I'm going to share those with you just in case any of you are considering purchasing this too. The folding palettes are a great idea. They're made from enamel and I really like the look and feel of them, but unfortunately when you open them up they slant downwards. That becomes a problem because your watercolour constantly pulls at the bottom of the palette. So ideally, I'd like them to be flat rather than slanted. This is not a deal breaker, but it is something that becomes a bit annoying. There's also a second issue that concerns the palettes. When you go to close the box, they kind of flap around and make it difficult to close the box smoothly, so you have to hold them and then close it, which just feels a bit clunky. But the main problem I have with this box, and something that's really bothered me from the beginning, is the fact that the watercolour pans, when the box is closed, are actually upside down. This means that you can't use any watercolours that stay slightly wet because they'll stick to the palettes and possibly end up all over the place. This seems like a major design flaw to me, and there's no possibility of putting the watercolours in the bottom of the box so that they would essentially be upright when the palette box is closed, because that's where the water bottle and water reservoir are. It is a beautiful object and it's lovely to have it on the desk, but these issues combined with the fact that it's very heavy for such a small palette box means that I've only ever used it in the studio and I really couldn't imagine travelling with it. I'm glad to have it and I have become quite attached to it, but would I buy it knowing what I know now? Probably not. Next up, my collection of soft pastels. The Diane Townsend set came from Choosing Keeping a couple of years ago, and the Unison pastels I bought more recently. I actually bought several Jackson's and Unison pastels a few years ago, found that I didn't use them and so I sold them. You would think that I would have learned my lesson, that pastels just aren't for me. But each time I'm drawn in by these gorgeous sticks of pigment that have the same allure as sweets in a sweet shop. They're just too tempting to resist. This time I bought them because I discovered pastel matte paper, a special paper for soft pastels that holds onto the pigment, meaning that there's less dust when you use them. However, I discovered that pastel matte works well with coloured pencils, and so I've ended up using it exclusively for that. Soft pastels are just something I never reach for, and this time I think I've learned my lesson. They don't suit my way of working and I don't like how messy they are. Some people don't mind the dust, but I do, so I'll be selling these and then they can go to a good home with someone who loves them and who will actually use them. I was so excited to try the Schmink Horadam Naturals when I found out about them last year. I love the natural tones and I enjoy using Schmink watercolours in general, but these are just very strange paints. I've tried them on different papers, but certain colours just seem to flow weirdly and hold on to the brush strokes, which isn't something I particularly want in a watercolour. I definitely wouldn't buy any more colours, and I'm glad I stopped at 5. I've been considering using these as a base to work on top of with coloured pencils, so we'll see how that goes. Despite the lovely muted colours, I wouldn't recommend them. At around £14 per tube, I currently have £70 worth of paints here that I'm not using. Surprisingly, given my love of Schmink watercolours in general, aside from the Horadam Naturals, the next art supply regret is another Schmink product. I bought this stock card specifically for a video so that I could test all of their super granulation colours. I own several colours from this range and I love them, so I was excited to explore them further. The dot card was frustrating from the beginning. The size of the watercolour dots was incredibly stingy, they were hard to re-wet, and several colours were weak when I could eventually get some pigment onto my brush. I ended up with a frayed brush, and to add insult to injury, the resulting video didn't even do that well on YouTube. That's not the fault of the paints, of course, but I know that the super granulation colours are so much better than this dot card would have you believe. Next up, we have watercolour pencils and Derwent Inktense blocks. I have a similar problem with watercolour pencils as I do with soft pastels. I keep buying them, selling them because I'm not using them, and then buying them again. This time I was influenced by another online creator who was using watercolour pencils in an interesting way, and so I decided to buy 15 Albrecht Dürer colours by Faber-Castell. I haven't really used them. I like the idea of them, but honestly, I just seem to reach for either watercolours or coloured pencils when I'm working. I hate the fact that once again they're sitting unused in my studio, so I'm going to try to make an effort to use them during timed Zoom drawing sessions with my Patreon members. I wonder whether this is where they'll prove to be useful. Please let me know in the comments below whether you use watercolour pencils, and if so, just share any useful tips you have, because I really would love to use these. As for the Derwent Inktense blocks, they seemed like a good idea for mixed media work, but again, there's something I just don't reach for. I have a few Inktense pencils which I really enjoy using, mainly for sketchbook work, in particular the time drawing sessions, as I can use them wet or dry. So in reality, the Inktense blocks just seem surplus to requirements. They're also fragile, so I don't use them in my travelling or location drawing kits, and I can't get the accuracy I'd like if I use them for drawing, so I'd rather use a pencil. I can see how these would be useful for some people, but I think I just have to accept that they're not for me. I'm going to show you what's inside this beautiful vintage wooden box, and I have to admit I'm quite embarrassed to share this particular art supply regret. Inside there are so many lino cutting and printing supplies. I dread to think how much money I've spent on these supplies, only to use them once or twice. I didn't even really get past the experimental stage. Most of the inks are untouched and the new rollers haven't been used. I have numerous lino blocks and some very fancy cutting tools. I don't know in what world or what reality I thought that I was going to have the time to develop my lino printing skills on top of everything else I'm already doing. I was so excited by this new hobby, this new interest, and I'd hoped that I would be able to get back to it at some point, but life got in the way and I now have other things I'd prefer to do, if I'm honest. Namely stitching, which I'm obsessed with, and making things with air-dried clay. Let's be honest, my life is already full with painting, drawing, stitching, running a Patreon and a YouTube channel, and also my shop. So when am I going to find the time to do lino printing? I'm thinking of selling my lino cutting equipment, but I'll definitely be keeping this amazing storage box and using it for my other art supplies. Finally, we have another type of pastel, this time the Caran d'Ache Neo Pastel. They're the ones on the left. My beloved Neocolor wax pastels are on the right. I love Neocolors because they're not messy. They don't create dust like soft pastels, and they aren't sticky like oil pastels. Oil pastels are so messy, they never fully dry, so you need to protect them with a fixative. And I can't use fixatives as I'm very sensitive to smells and chemicals. What was I thinking? I don't know, but maybe someday I'll learn. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at my biggest art supply regrets. I do have a few more, so if you're curious to see them, I may make a second version of this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and give this video a thumbs up so that it can reach a wider audience. That really helps me out, it helps this channel, and it helps me to make more videos. Okay everyone, take care. Let me know your biggest art supply regret in the comment section below, and I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.